Hi, friends, and welcome to Self-Taught Humanoid Person Episode 3. Still don't know if I'm going to change that title yet. This episode might be a little longer than the past episodes because I made an effort to relax a little bit and not only in my writing but in my demeanor. So I can go a little more in depth on things, but I still have to avoid certain words and things just because of the given situation. So some things do have to be vague. But I'm gonna be radically honest right now. What we call it. So I was calling it radical honesty. Writing this episode has put my body into an emotional flashback, and it's not that I'm not coping well, it's just it's been a little difficult because my brain is extremely foggy. And like last night, after I wrote this whole thing, 'cause it took me literally all day to write to get through and like form a proper narrative with a conclusion and everything because I know I struggle with that. And um it made my CPTSD flare up, and so today I am extremely foggy. Um I am struggling with like the steps of my tasks, but I'm okay. I am okay. I was hallucinating a little last night, which is a side effect that I recently learned about, like seeing shadow people and whatnot. And I kept seeing like a shadow person like come through the door, but you'll see why I have that specific thing once I get into the stories. I just wanted to um just like be honest about where I am because I thought at like as I was writing this and I was realizing that I was having struggle or like I was struggling to focus and stay on task. I kept wanting to like quit and do something else, and I had to make myself like stick through it because that this is my number one priority for the week. And then once I get this done, I can do all of the other shit that my brain is on. But then I have an anxiety, so I have a fidget, so I can hopefully sit a little stiller. But yeah, I just wanted to just be honest. It's a ride. I didn't get like dysregulated. I didn't get that like adrenaline spike that usually comes with that this kind of thing. It's just like my body feels like it's still in the situation and it's not. But I wanted to do like CPTSD and everything as a different episode of like what I experience and things because as I'm learning and going through all of this, every day I pretty much learn something new. So I wanted to just do that on its own and not, I wasn't going to say anything, but now that I'm sitting here trying to relax to do a longer and I guess more like conversational, I guess it's not really in depth because I don't want to go like, there's, it's like not specific details and stuff that aren't necessary. Like, that's not what I mean when I say in depth. I just mean like explaining my topics and my thoughts a little better because again, I know that's another thing I struggle with in my writing is that there's things that context that was created like in my head that doesn't come through in the writing if you don't have my head. So I don't know, I just wanted to get that out of the way, but trying to keep this all as one, and if there has to be more editing then that's okay because it's been hard, but it's something that I've wanted to talk about, and I think, I should talk about. Okay, I just double checking that it's still recording because I can't really see my OBS right now. I have a little bit of a different setup. I put a lot more work into this episode. Like I said, I've, it's not a different setup. I'm in the same exact corner. It's just like my lighting and cameras that are different. Yeah, that's another thing is I have a lot of really long pauses in between my thoughts because of the fogginess, and I'm trying to um like I'm trying to thing put ideas to words, and my brain is not great at that state. even though I have it all written out, there's a couple of things that just need to be like moved around and stuff. So, yeah. My back is still hurting. Or it's hurting again, I guess. But anyway, I don't know if I'm gonna keep the title self-taught humanoid person. That was just something that I said once that was well, I probably said it more than once. Um, but I tend to phrase things weird. I've thought about also like real life person because that's another phrase that I use a lot. They all say, people will be like, "Oh, are you even real?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, it's like a real life person," and then with an alien emoji. So I thought about that, but then I was like, that kind of sounds like millennial, like adulting kind of language. So I don't know. I I'm okay with things that are like originally weird from my brain, but I don't know if real life person is originally in my brain. But anyways, let's get into episode 3, which is how journaling saved my life, pretty much. And like, I know that journaling isn't, doesn't seem like an exciting topic, especially someone like me. I probably wouldn't have watched this video a couple years ago, because for my entire life, I wasn't really able to do it. I always thought like journaling is boring and I don't know what I'm supposed to write and I can't remember ever to do it regularly. And so like if it doesn't do anything for me, then what's the point, I guess? But who I am today, I can say that this ability, this skill to write in specific ways when I'm either, triggered or dysregulated or just like mentally not having a good day, having these skills has like actually saved my life. And I am very grateful for it. And just for like relatability's sake, I do have diagnosed ADHD and CPTSD, not self-diagnosed, but that is how I got my diagnosis. But yes, I have it actually on paper. Um, so, I am all too familiar with people saying things like keep a planner and just write things down and stuff like that. And the truth is nobody telling you to do anything is ever going to work for anything. You have to be absolutely ready to change your situation. Otherwise, the advice is just it's never going to feel right. And I'm not a big fan of being told what to do, and I am not a big fan of telling people what to do. So that's not something that I intend to ever do. Um, it's the reason that I speak about these things. Like, I don't ever use, like, you need to do this, or you should, or you have to. I tell stories of things that have legitimately worked in my life. And if you relate in some way and you can take pieces of it or ideas and, form it into your own thing, and that helps you, then that's the whole point. You don't have to follow step by step exactly what I do. I just kind of threw that into the last video as like a format sake because I'm like I keep staring at my Dr. Pepper. I just did that for like a format sake and to make my ideas seem a little more cohesive, which is why, and it was done in editing after I had already written it. So this time I actually wrote it out with the structure, and I already edited this like once, like edited the writing, not actually the video. But yeah, I'm not big on the whole you need to. And if I ever do speak in like a you need kind of way, I'm either speaking from like being in that place and knowing and figuring out what I needed when I was in that place. And I'm typically in that context using the you as a construct. Like, when you've been suffering, you need change. That's, a thought that I have. Some people wouldn't agree, so it's not like a fundamental fact or anything. But if I do speak with like basic human facts, I might use you as well, but it would be like things like, when you're hungry, you need to eat. It's just human things. I'm never gonna tell you what to do because I don't know you, I don't know your situation. But if you're finding yourself stuck in like the same kind of cycles over and over, and you're looking for ways that others have broken out of their cycles, then welcome. We're here. That's kind of the idea of this whole podcast thing. I don't have a plan, I don't have branding, and my episodes are not typically long enough to like brandish the podcast title. But I have an idea and I'm running with it to see where it goes. So, and like the self-taught humanoid thing was a way that I described to myself on a stream years ago because everything that I've learned pretty much has been self-taught. Sometimes, especially in like my older years, I was under guidance of somebody who knew better than me. But the majority of the time, I've just been kind of winging it. It's because like I grew up in a house that it was expected for you to just do things and just take care of yourself, and the less you need the main caregiver, the better, like the better of a kid you were. And asking why something needed to be done was seen as like a challenge, rebellion, or like straight up refusal to follow instruction instead of like what it really was, which is, a developing mind trying to rationalize their world. I mean, it was laziness and neglect under the guise of teaching independence. And as a result, I became hyper independent, which is not a good thing. It is a response to trauma. It is not something to be proud of. Luckily, I did have my grandma who took time to answer all of my why questions and taught me basic human skills like making my bed and cooking food, so I wasn't a complete lost cause. Nevertheless, hyperindependence is the reason that I approached things the way that I did for a really long time. I would research the absolute fuck out of something until there's no more information to glean from it in order for me to do the task alone, whatever it is. And I would try and fail for months, sometimes years, with like the content creation stuff and whatever, before like I ever asked for help or advice or even told anyone what I was doing, to be honest. And as I mentioned in a previous episode, I wouldn't show or tell anyone what I was doing or what I was learning until I felt that I was good at it or until it was done. Because in households like the one that I grew up in, the learning process and being bad at something are not seen favorably, and doing something wrong, as in like doing it the wrong way, like, coloring outside the lines, singing off key, things like that are part of the learning experience, but not something that like you would show in final performance. Those things aren't met with, education or support to get better. They're met with shame. So you learn to only do things that you're good at, and you never venture into new hobbies or anything that you wouldn't be good at off the bat. It also teaches you to only like things that are seen as acceptable by the caregiver. If you have like odd or niche interests for your age or whatever, there will be shame. And as a kid, I loved stationery and office supplies. And as you can imagine, this was not a supported interest. I was teased, shamed, called not normal, the works. There was also feigned interest, which to this day is something that truly pisses me off because not only do the people who do this type of thing, not only do they pretend to care and pretend to support you by like buying you the things that you need to do the hobby or whatever, but they'll intentionally buy the wrong thing. So you have a reaction and then you look ungrateful. And it becomes about how you're ungrateful. Uh, you're bad. You're a bad kid. Or they'll buy the right thing, but they'll buy the shittiest version of that thing and they blame you when it breaks or underperforms. Like, I would get pens and markers and stuff like that, but they would dry out in like a day, or they would, like, you would open the box and one of them would be dried out. Or, like, the markers wouldn't be any good and the tips would fray, and then your lines aren't clean, but it's your fault because you didn't take good care of it. You were irresponsible because you left the cap off. And it never mattered how hard you tried to keep it nice. I have this one memory of like Easter, some holiday, maybe it was Christmas, I don't know. But my aforementioned grandma got me some highlighters because, of course, she did. And she got me the Sharpie brand highlighters. And I was absolutely stoked, dude. I remember being so amazed that I owned these. I went around to everybody at my aunt's house and I was like, and look, they're like the Sharpie brands, so they're not gonna, they're not gonna break. They're gonna last a long time. And everyone got really annoyed with me, to be honest. But in my tiny brain, I was told like we couldn't afford that brand. Or if I pointed out that they were on sale or it was just one marker in the pack, the reason became that I couldn't handle the responsibility and it would just dry out anyway or whatever. I would break it. So the fact that I had these markers, these coveted markers, it was like, to me, it was like I had the fucking holy grail. But I learned from their annoyance that this wasn't a normal interest to have and to not be excited about things like this externally. But I took absolutely great care of those markers because I knew I wasn't going to get more. And they lasted me through high school at least. I was either an adult when I had to buy new ones for like college, or it was when I had my like first real job, which I was like 17 or 18. So they lasted a very long time. I don't think I was the problem, but I digress. And you would think that with this interest in stationery and office supplies that, journaling, writing letters, writing stories, something related to those items would go with it. Unfortunately, not really in my experience because of these cycles that I would go through. I had many cycles of interest with journaling. A lot of the times, that's how my interests go and my hobbies go, is that I'll have a period where like I am really into it and fascinated by it and can't put it down, and then I'll put it down for months or years at a time. And then one day I'm just like, oh my God, I really want to do that. And I pick it right back up where I left off. So I've had these cycles of interest with journaling, but every time the interest peaked, I would ask for like a new notebook or a special journal or something, special to me being like a composition notebook because it wasn't the 25-cent spiral notebooks. And I was told either that we couldn't afford it or that I was never going to stick with journaling. So it was a waste to just spend the money and buy one. And just a side note, I am aware of like all the poverty trauma and my caregiver's tendency to take my reactions to things as personal slights against them. It might be covered in a future topic if a more fitting topic so inclines, but I'm not going into it right now. I just want it, like, it's not earth shattering to me that this was happening. Anyway, I would try like really hard to prove them wrong and earn like my new notebook or my new journal. And I would take like an old school notebook or something and just rip all of the old pages out that have like writing on them. So my brain could associate this thing, this new thing, or not new, but this fresh notebook as journal. And I would try and keep it up, but without like the novelty factor and the newness, part, my ADHD brain just wasn't as interested, and I couldn't keep it up for more than a couple days. Plus, most everyone in my environment at the time believed in my failure and would even do things to like sabotage my success so they could justify their decisions. And I don't mean like hiding my journaling stuff, though, to be honest, I wouldn't ever know if they did because of the way that like ADHD memory works. I would just assume that I misplaced it and beat myself up for being irresponsible for misplacing my journal. The hiding stuff did happen with other things, but I'm not going to go into that now. What I mean by sabotaging, though, is things like pulling my attention away when I was actively journaling, or if I, said that I wanted to go journal, or like I was setting up my things because that's something that I do. It's like if I'm gonna journal, I'm gonna get my pens out and my journal and maybe stickers or things like that and set up my workspace, I guess. So when they saw me doing that, they would pull my attention away. And suddenly that moment became about how the dishes hadn't been done properly, or honestly, whatever else they could come up with. Another factor that played into my inability to keep a journal was a complete lack of privacy in the household. It was a we don't believe in door locks, kind of household, but except for their door, of course. Everything that I did, said, and wrote was monitored. If I wrote a secret like a crush at school, I would be teased about it later, not knowing that they had found my writing. If I wrote like a fiction story type deal, I would be made fun of for the flaws of it or the perceived flaws, even. Like one time, I remember I used the phrase voila, and I used it correctly. I know I did. It's French and it means like, there it is, there you are. Like, for example, if someone was like, oh no, there's no way that we can make a hat under these conditions, and you like whip one together and you present it, you say, voila, you did it. There it is. And I know I used the little Microsoft paperclip to spell it correctly because I didn't want anyone thinking I was stupid. The response to this was, what's viola mean? And when I explained, they said, no one's going to know what that means. I always need a second to process that. But the worst thing was, as I'm sure most of you could predict, journaling about family dynamics and the caregiver. Anything less than favorable written about the caregiver became a presentation of why I was horrible. I would be called into whatever room the caregiver was in, and saying called, there's a reason I don't go by my real name anymore. Let's just say that. So I would, you know, arrive to them in this room already mid emotional fit. Either they were rife with anger or overflowing with tears. And in their hands was my writing, my journal, whatever they found. And I was expected to explain myself, console, and assure them that they were, in fact, a great caregiver. I was just emotional, or I was blame shifting, or I really didn't mean it. And regardless of what I said, I was never believed and I was always punished. And so, like what most kids would do, I tried hiding my writing, but it was always found either through room snooping when I wasn't there, or because, as I mentioned before, there were no locks. I would be caught because I was sitting quietly in my room, and they would literally barge in through the door. They didn't knock either, because seeing me jump and have that panic and that adrenaline spike and that cortisol spike was so funny that it had to be done daily, if not multiple times a day. The kicks, you know. But another topic, another time. They would see what was on my desk and say, "What's that?" And there did not exist an answer that I could give where I was believed and left alone. It was either immediately read over my shoulder or taken off my desk and read immediately anyway. And the only way I could attempt to keep calm in the house and avoid being accosted was to give it up altogether and make the conclusion about my personality or whatever that I was both a bad writer and a bad kid. I couldn't write without it being a huge deal and a huge point of contention in my environment. And it became the only way that I could enjoy writing and organizing information and organizing information like on a page and like organizing my stationery and like office supplies was through school, because suddenly all of it became acceptable when it came with a "my kid is an honor student" bumper sticker. And the effects of this have lasted my entire life. As I mentioned in the beginning of this, it's something that I still struggle with, but I am getting through. And when I go to like start writing something, I have to be completely alone and the door has to be locked. Even yesterday, as I was writing this, I had to have the door locked, even though I know that the only other person who is in the house is a trusted person who would only be asking if I want to order a pizza. But my body still experiences that imminent panic of the door flinging open and me being in trouble again. So if I'm still experiencing the panic and fear and all of that, how on earth are you supposed to believe that journaling has saved my life? I'm glad you asked. As I mentioned in episode 1, I think it was, when I was sick in bed for a couple years, one of the only things that I could do for entertainment was to play video games. And during this time, I had just gotten my ADHD diagnosis and I was starting stimulant medication for the first time. And they always start you at a low dose and all of that. So I was able to focus more and I began to understand things in a way that I had never understood them before. It was like shifting from my understanding being memory recall to my understanding being actual understanding of the complex systems and how things all work. That's just broad spectrum, not specific to this, but specific to video games. As you can probably see from like old streams of mine that obviously I keep up, and I'm probably gonna put more up. I would put like everything into either strength or HP. And then I would pick the weapon that had the most damage output, and I would just go at the task as hard as I could. And if I kept failing, I came to the conclusion that I just needed to do some side questing and level up a bit. During this period of my life, I was playing a lot of Destiny 2. I had played it a little bit before, but I was not good. But at the point where I was starting medication, bed, all that, I began to see the more intricacies of how to be stronger in certain instances without like heavy grinding. These intricacies are things like, weapon type, weapon mod, armor type, armor mods, and like element types. And that's in relation to Destiny. With Destiny, the things like weapons, most, if not all of them, have like a special feature. With exotic weapons, the special feature is relative to that weapon alone. But with like legendary weapons, most of the special features are on a role-based system. So sometimes when you get the gun, it will have one set of 3 perks. And then the next time you get it, it might have a completely different set of, 3 different perks. One way to boost your power in an instance or encounter is with the right exotic weapon. But another way could be with a legendary weapon that has a perk that like heals your team every time you get 3 headshots in a row or something. And for exotics alone, exotic weapons, there were 80 different ones at the time that I was playing. That is so many to try and memorize. And it was a lot to learn what they're called and what they do. I was doing okay, but trying to memorize them all was overwhelming, and I felt like I was letting my teammate down. So, this interest in journaling, keeping notes, you know, rose again, and I decided to go all in. I got a notebook and I listed every weapon that I had, what it did, and what perks it had, and even gave it a gold star sticker if it was an exotic. And my notes weren't really shamed at the time because the only people in my environment benefited from me learning more. But I had so much fun making these notes. I had so many different color pens and markers and stickers, and I was able to organize the information in a way that I not only understood the information, but I could implement it in my gameplay and successfully overcome obstacles. And this completely reignited my love for stationery, notebooks, office stuff. And I would spend hours working on my notebooks. I had, open pens all over the bed, drawing on me, drawing on my sheets, drawing on the mattress. And that's something I would have been shamed for when I was younger. Saying, like, why can't I just do it normally and not make everything I do a complete mess because I drew on myself? And I was embarrassed at first, but I quickly got over it. I needed that time of doing it in a messy way and allowing myself play. And I still do notes for games so I can accomplish the things in the games that I want to accomplish. But I'm no longer a mess. I no longer make a mess with it. And it wasn't long before I started writing down like real life things. I had a separate notebook for that, like to-dos and things like that. But I couldn't make it as pretty as my weapon guide with all the crossing out and everything, so it didn't really work for my brain at the time. So I ended up switching to Discord, and I made a My Brain Discord server that only I had access to, and I didn't have to worry about anybody reading it, and I can keep important information that I needed to have, like logins, medical information, things that I needed to remember, but in my state of being in bed and all of the brain fog and everything, I wasn't doing so hot with the memory. And then eventually there was a little journal section. And I can see now, looking back at those first entries, I looked at them yesterday. That was the point that the devaluation had ended and the discard had begun in my environment. And I responded to it by giving myself what I needed in those moments. I gave myself the reassurance that I needed. And that in itself was a huge change for me. And I'm so proud of myself for standing true to myself. Instead of giving more and more undeserved excuses, I told myself, no, this is actually fucked up and I'm not going to take it anymore. I deserve enthusiastic love. And a big part of my ADHD journey, or what started as an ADHD journey and has led to more, was figuring out where I struggled, why I struggled, and how I can reapproach the things that I struggle with. I'm not sure if it was Dr. K who was the first one to mention journaling like this, but he's the one that I remember the most prominently. And he's the one that made me want to start journaling the hard stuff, the icky stuff, the traumas that were literally haunting me every day, causing severe panic attacks. At this point, I was journaling at least once a day with a couple sentences so I could remember what happened each day. And I could remember things to bring up to my doctor next time I saw them. But I wasn't journaling my mental state at the time. I wasn't journaling bad things that were happening. And I wasn't journaling how I was emotionally responding to those things. The point of the journaling at that time was to track my physical well-being so I could medically figure out why I couldn't get out of bed without extreme pain. And then I came across Dr. K, or on YouTube here, he's called Healthy Gamer GG, I believe. I'd been watching a few of his videos when I saw the one called Does Journaling Actually Work? And I'll link the full video below because I believe if you have interest in this, then you should probably watch that one too. But I'll put a couple clips in where it's relevant. But basically, he says that journaling just magically works.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about journaling. And if you're like me, journaling actually sounds like a terrible idea. I'm supposed to put down my deepest, darkest thoughts on a piece of paper, and then somehow that'll magically improve the problem? Yeah, thanks, but no thanks. What difference does it make if I just write down all of the things that I can't fix? Is it like journaling actually just magically makes things better when we just write about them? And I know this sounds absolutely insane, but the answer is yes. Actually, yes, that's exactly how it works. We have no idea how this actually happens, but it seems like there's actually really strong evidence that journaling just magically makes things better. Now, you may be confused by that. What do you mean it magically makes things better? So here's just an example of a couple of really interesting studies. So the first is that a group of psychologists have repeatedly measured students who journal, and they journal about all kinds of different things. So sometimes they'll talk about their emotions, sometimes they'll talk about what they're doing that day. But the one thing that's really bizarre is journaling seems to increase their grades. Another example of things kind of magically getting better that we don't understand comes from studies of physiology. So people will do studies on the effects of journaling on things like antibody responses, the immune system, response to cancer treatment and vaccines. There are studies about how journaling improves like blood pressure and even like improves some degree of like blood glucose control and all kinds of unrelated things.
And what he said about traumatic situations and post-traumatic growth and the pronoun shift and accountability, that section really resonated with me.
So when you journal about something that is emotionally challenging, it tends to evoke those emotions. And this is exactly what we spend most of our time avoiding, right? This is why we will spend time on social media or play video games or whatever, like because we want to avoid these negative emotions. But there's something that's really interesting that happens when you journal. So when you journal, you start to evoke these emotions, but you evoke them in kind of like a diet sort of way. So it's not like regular Coke, it's like Diet Coke or a diet soda. And if you think about it, the emotional burden that you feel when you journal is less than the actual experience. So some people have hypothesized that this is almost like trauma exposure therapy, where you are exposing yourself to your negative emotions in small doses. And what we tend to see over time with people who journal is like, yeah, the experience of journaling is kind of uncomfortable, but what it actually does is teaches you how to tolerate discomfort. And the interesting thing is that as you experience more and more of that negative emotion while you're journaling, over time, people have done studies on this, the amount of negative emotion that you experience, or really the amount of stress that you experience when recalling the emotion, actually goes down. And so as your stress level goes down, you start to resist negative emotion. And then what happens is something actually really cool is now that you no longer need to fear negative emotion, you can actually have cringe moments and not worry about them. So it seems that journaling actually increases our ability to tolerate negative emotion. So the more we journal, it seems like one of the biggest advantages is that increase in journaling decreases our avoidance of negative things or things that make us feel bad. So another good example of this is building a narrative. So there's a lot of research that shows that if human beings go through a traumatic experience, they don't all develop PTSD. So for example, there are human beings that will go through a traumatic experience and like half of them will enter into something called post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is when something kind of bad happens to you, but you grow as a person and you actually end up kind of like better than you started off. On the flip side, sometimes if you have a traumatic experience, it's not what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. The other unfortunate truth is that what doesn't kill you can cripple you for the rest of your life. And this is the case of something like PTSD, where a trauma lingers and continues to damage someone. Then some researchers got kind of curious and were trying to figure out, okay, what's the difference between going the post-traumatic growth route and going the post-traumatic stress disorder route? What determines whether someone is able to like heal from trauma and become a stronger person? One of the major variables is something called narrative. So people who are able to construct some kind of narrative about their life are the ones who will like grow from negative experiences. This is where doing something like journaling can actually help us construct a narrative. It is a very, very cohesive exercise that can help us make sense of the events around us. There's studies that show that people who journal will change their pronoun usage. Now, we're not talking about transgender kind of stuff. What I mean is that if you normally think about a situation, so let's say that you have social anxiety, and you sort of think about a situation, and as your mind understands the situation, you think, oh my God, I look so stupid. Oh my God, these people don't like me. I don't know how to behave properly. People must think I'm awkward. People must feel like I'm a third wheel. People must not like the way that I think. And so if you think about those thoughts, what is the subject of those thoughts? I'm saying people. People think this about me. People think that about me. People think this about me. People think that about me. And so one of the really interesting things is that when people are stuck in a negative cognitive pattern, they tend to be focused either too much on themselves. I'm at fault. This is all my fault. This is my problem. I'm a waste of space. People, I don't like hanging out with people or whatever. It's I, or it's people. And if you look at someone like a narcissist, this is a really good example. So a narcissist, when they construct a narrative about their life, other people are always messing with them. These people don't like me. They don't respect me. They don't love me. Despite everything that I do, they don't experience any gratitude for me. So someone who's narcissistic is always thinking about them. On the flip side, if someone has something like a mood disorder and is in a depressive episode, the person who's always at fault is themselves. I'm a waste of space. My family is better off without me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't like the way that I look when I look in the mirror. I'm ugly. I'm this. So the key thing, though, is that narcissists always use they and them or people, and people who are depressed will always use I. So there's data that shows that when you start to journal, that becomes fluid. So literally, people will analyze the pronouns that are used in journaling. And at the beginning of journaling, you'll say I, or you'll say they. But as you journal more, you start to mix the two statements. And so like this is an example of, let's say, a narcissist who journals will say, these people don't like me. These people don't respect me. And then over time, as they journal, they'll start to say, well, sometimes I don't behave respectfully towards them. Sometimes maybe I'm the one who's actually at fault. I could have started doing this better. And for people who are depressed, you'll see the opposite. I'm a waste of space. I'm not valuable. Other people sometimes don't treat me with respect. And I sometimes can be valuable, but people don't give me what I deserve. So what we'll literally see is a fluctuation in the pronoun usage. And what that sort of indicates is that people are changing their narratives. So as a narcissist starts to journal, they start to realize, and they start to use more I statements and start to realize, oh, maybe I am at fault. And this is really cool because once you start to realize, okay, wait a second, maybe they're not to blame, maybe I'm to blame, you may need that. Or the flip side, if you have super low self-esteem, is you're always going to be blaming yourself and you'll start to hold other people accountable. So it seems like journaling helps us kind of change perspectives and build a more cohesive narrative.
What he said really resonated with me because of those traumas that kept boiling up every day, causing severe panic attacks. I originally avoided them like he said. I was afraid that if I wrote them down, it would either be found and I would have to explain my most horrific memories, or if I wrote them down, it would make them real and it would make them a part of my narrative for the rest of my life. So each time they came boiling up, I kept stuffing them back down. But it was getting extremely difficult to cope with. So, once again, trusting the knowledge of somebody who knows better than me, I started writing out every traumatic thing that has ever happened to me. Not all at once, of course. I would pick the one that was coming up the strongest at the time and eliciting the strongest reaction from me, and I would write it out. And I gave myself the space to experience and feel the emotions when they came up. And then when that specific writing session was over, I would, give myself the right aftercare, and I would give myself compassion and time to recover, because it does dysregulate your entire body. And, sometimes recovering was just a couple hours, or I could sleep on it and I'd be okay. And sometimes it was a couple days where I was foggy and it was difficult to even do basic care tasks, but it got easier. And then I would return to my regularly scheduled programming until another trauma started coming up. And then I would follow the same protocol again. And when I was in the middle of it and tackling each one of those that arose, it kind of felt like I was never going to run out of trauma and I would be stuck doing this forever until one day I actually just ran out of traumas. And when I was inside of it, each time that I did this protocol, these steps, whatever you want to call it got a little bit easier because I could predict what was going to happen. I could predict that emotions were going to arise, and I could predict that I was going to be off for a few days. So it made going through it easier and easier each time, but at the same time, feeling like it wasn't going to end until it did. And it wasn't until I made it through all of it and I realized that I ran out of traumas that I was like, holy shit. And I honestly haven't had a panic attack since. And I no longer think about any of it often, if at all. And I felt valid and strong enough to tell somebody. And it's important to have somebody outside of yourself validate those experiences, that you weren't this horrible thing and the situation was extremely fucked up and you were just trying to survive it. That is so important. So, all of this trauma journaling, um, wrapping up, is what led to the past self journaling that I mentioned in the previous episode. I realized that the self that's writing and the self that's in my mind that's reading what is being written in that moment feel like separate experiences. And writing everything out makes things feel more in sync. And it helps me to construct a more accurate narrative of like what actually happened, instead of constantly blaming and shaming myself for being a bad human. And I don't mean like bad as in morally when I mean this, as like, you know, bad human, bad kid. I don't mean like morally doing bad things. I mean that I felt so fundamentally bad at acting like a human and connecting with other humans. Even if the person hurting me was an objectively bad person, I would blame myself for attracting them or choosing them or wanting to see any good in them. So from there, with the trauma journaling done and the past self journaling done, I went back to just regular daily journaling, even if it was just 2 or 3 sentences about, where my brain space was and how that felt. Timeline wise, I finished the trauma journaling, past self journaling, things like that, at end of 2022, beginning of 2023. And I was doing great with my ADHD treatment as well, but that's when I started to see more with daily journaling, just 2 or 3 sentences about my brain space. I could start seeing my patterns. And I noticed that my anxiety began to resurface, but it took a completely different form. The world that I was living in and the understanding that I had was completely new. So I got anxious about new things in a new way. This was about the time that I started streaming again and working my way back into being an independent real life person. And as I began to physically be able to do things again, I realized that mentally I couldn't do things. I couldn't do anything, even if it was something that I was really excited about. And I went from debilitating panic attacks to debilitating shutdown. And I was stuck in a place that hadn't wanted me there for years before I ever realized. It felt like every single moment was going to be the moment that everything in my life was going to blow up and I wouldn't have the skills or ability to help myself. So, as we're seeing a theme here, I did what I tend to do when I hit a wall, and that's find somebody who knows more about this than I do. I started noticing with the ADHD being treated that there are other symptoms that aren't explained by it. That's what I mean by more. And I started working on my CPTSD, which is complex post traumatic stress disorder. I'll go into the information about that in a separate video. But seeking information to help me with my CPTSD is what led me to a YouTube channel called The Crappy Childhood Fairy. I watched a few videos and I felt like, man, this lady really gets it. So I took her class. It's called The Daily Practice, and I highly recommend the class. It's a free class, so it's a free resource. And once you get in and do the class, it opens up access to other resources for people struggling with things like this. But what I learned in that class was what I consider the final piece in my journaling journey. And it was also the final piece to getting me out of these toxic cycles, where I could begin to have a life where I wasn't just trying to survive it, but where I could live better and healthier and do the things that I've always wanted to do and to feel the safest that I've probably felt since my grandma's house. So, the daily practice is a journaling technique and a meditation. And if I try to explain it, I won't do it justice. So, I will link her below as well with a video. But in simple terms, the journaling portion of the daily practice is writing out fears and resentments. And she gives you like a structure that the sentences are to be written in because it structures the thoughts around the fears and resentments in a way that a dysregulated nervous system wouldn't. The thoughts that Dr. K mentioned earlier about, either I'm the problem, I'm the problem, I'm the problem, or they, them, those are examples of thoughts coming from a dysregulated nervous system. So for the daily practice, you write your fears and resentments, you journal it until you basically run out of the ones coming to mind. And then she gives you a little sign off, and I honestly have never done it from memory. I always have to look at it. But it's basically like a release spell or a prayer to give it to God, depending on what you believe. And, you sign it and then you tear it the fuck up and throw it away. And no one can find it, no one can read it, no one can accost you about it, no one can ask you about it. It is between you and whatever your higher power is, be it God or the universe or Mother Gaia, whatever. And you follow that practice, after you throw it away, you follow it with a short meditation, which I did have to adapt because I was living in the situation that was causing my dysregulation. But it still helps bring the nervous system back to center so that you can actually accomplish and do the things that you need to do to be able to live better and have healthier connections. And learning to take control of my dysregulation instead of just coping with the outcomes was life changing. It took back my power from literally everybody else. If they can't trigger me, they can't manipulate me, which means they can't control me. And I'm finally free and I have my own back this time. So before all of this, my brain space felt like endless dark space where everything that I knew, all of my memories, everything that I had to accomplish, anything that's supposed to be in your brain, I guess, was just floating in that open space. That by space I mean like space. By space I mean like planets, like just dark vast space where everything is just floating and things would make their way in and out of my reach with each cycle, orbit, whatever you want to call it. So I could never grasp onto something exactly when I wanted to, exactly the way that I wanted to be able to implement that them, to implement my knowledge, to, implement my memories. But now my brain space is so fucking peaceful. Like I'm not I'm not exaggerating. It's my brain is so peaceful and it's a place that I enjoy being in, which is something that I could not say before. And it's a peaceful place that I can count on because I know it's going to be there because I'm in control of it. I have my power back. So I no longer feel the need to do the daily practice every day because just like my traumas, I ran out of fears and resentments too. And I no longer feel the need to daily journal, but I do check in with myself every couple days. And I always have one. The pink one right now, the dark pink. And it's always there for me if I'm having a particularly hard day, just like the daily practice. It's always there if I need to do it because skills don't go away, they can't be taken from you. And all in all, it's been about a month since I left the most recent and last toxic cycle. And I feel like I don't even recognize the person, the me that was in that situation. For the first time, probably since I was a kid, but maybe ever, I wake up excited for the day in front of me. My ideas, my creativity, my drive, my wants, basically my personality is coming back day by day. And as you can see from my content lately, I'm accomplishing goals and I'm starting to do things that I have always wanted to do. I could not be more proud of myself. And with that, I want to give a thank you to people like Dr. K and Anna, the crappy childhood fairy, for sharing this information because it, even though it doesn't seem like it, it's vital, life saving information. It may not, the information itself may not save you, but what you can do with that information and pull yourself out, it's information that you can use to save yourself. And I want to give a special thank you to my amazing friends behind the scenes who not only stayed through all of it, but reached into the pit and pulled me out. And of course, an extra special thank you to Aurora for being absolutely drenched in tears and still comes running to me. She's literally right there because I'm getting choked up. Every time I start crying, she comes running. And with that, I close and I bid you all a very good butts.